For the story opens up with love named clearly, and then delay not just named as clearly. Jesus is told Lazarus is sick. The text named Jesus' love for this family, and then there's a bit of a delay. Jesus stays where he is for 2 days longer. There's no attempt to soften it, no attempt to rush this scene towards comfort and healing. In that space, the imagination might start doing what it does. It starts running different scenarios, rehearsing different outcomes, bracing for what might come. Then Jesus finally speaks the word, Lazarus is dead. And with that sentence, the crisis is no longer a possibility, but a reality. The disciples start speaking the language of danger. If Jesus goes back, that means if Jesus returns to where he came from, well, the future might change. There might be some fear of facing what is to come. For isn't that where they tried to stone him? But Thomas says a line that sounds like someone who knows what this going back will actually cost. Let us also go that we might die with him. In the face of fear about facing the uncertain, this line becomes a confession for these disciples over the course of this story. There is a preparation that must exist, that must occur if they are to follow Christ. They must follow even when it pushes up against fear, against what they assume will happen if they follow Jesus into this place of loss and conflict. For there is a turning in this passage, but there is a turning in the Gospel of John that takes place to where this sets in motion the way of the cross. We pick up in verse 17. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews who had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, and while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha said, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." But Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they might die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" And she said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." Verse 29, and when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up and quickly go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in his spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" And that's where we end in verse 37. And it says Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. There's a kind of grief that is sudden. And there's a kind of grief that becomes the air, the climate. 4 days is enough time for that house to change a little, enough time for the quiet to return after the first wave of visitors, enough time for reality to feel permanent. Martha comes first and says some words that maybe we have uttered as well. Lord, if you'd have been here, if you'd have done something, my brother would not have died. If you had been here, this would not have happened. If you had only been there, things might be different. If you would have responded to the message that I sent you instead of waiting just 2 days and came here and now, things would have changed. Maybe it's a way of arguing with the past, of trying to preserve love by keeping blame somewhere, even if the blame lands on God. But Martha reaches for a safe shape of faith. For resurrection belongs to the last day, is what she said, which is later and eventually to be true, but somewhere in the distance. And Jesus reframes that and says, I am the resurrection and I am the life. Resurrection is not only what God will do at the end, but resurrection still stands here, and I will show you. It still speaks here. It enters this living room of grief and addresses the person trying to keep hope contained. And Mary arrives, and she says what? Something eerily similar. Lord, if you'd have only been here. If you'd have been here, things would have been different. If you'd have been there, this might not have happened. If you responded to the message I sent when I sent, you would have changed things. Things would have changed. My brother would still be alive. Remember, John is writing many years after the death of Christ to a Christian community, still in turmoil, trying to figure out what it means to be a follower of Christ in the midst of persecution. Many years after Christ had been risen and no longer present in the world, waiting patiently and anxiously for the return of Christ, giving prayers day in and day out for this return. Grief and loss continuing to occur. Prayers of, Lord, if you had only been here, if you had not left us, if the resurrection would have kept you here just a little longer, maybe things would be different, echoing into the heavens. Their journey in the wilderness as they await Christ. And verse 35 says, Jesus began to weep. Act 3. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was laying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd that is standing here, so they might believe the one who you have sent." When he said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Here ends our reading. For at the tomb, the first command is not to Lazarus. The first command is given to those who are there, take away the stone. The command forces this decision. Do we trust and act or deliberate and doubt? Because that stone is not only heavy. That stone, it protects something. That stone keeps loss contained. That stone keeps everyone from having to open what might hurt. And Martha names what everyone knows. Jesus, there's going to be a bit of stench as we roll this stone away. Maybe it's best that we keep it where it was because it might cause us to be uncomfortable. But the gospel presses on this sealed place, take away the stone. And then Jesus uses the words, Lazarus, come out. Lazarus, come out, and a man who was dead for 4 days comes back to life. And there is a miracle, but it is not the only miracle, and it is not the end of our story, for it does not end there. There is a miracle, but Jesus says, I ain't done yet. There is a miracle, and Jesus proclaims, but wait, there is more. For unbind this man and let him go. Because you can be a resurrected body and still be constrained by the linens which hold you as good as dead. You can still be wrapped and controlled by what it is that brought you in the tomb to the first place. It is not just enough to be resurrected, but one must also be restored, for the resurrected body needs to be unbound to follow Christ, needs to be unbound to step out of that tomb and to follow into the world. Unbind him and let him go. That call is just as much to Lazarus as it is to us here in these pews today, as it is to the early church who is waiting on the return of Christ. Unbind us from whatever has claimed us as good as dead, and let us go. Unbind us from the hunger for power and perfection that never stops, only demanding more and never gives us enough. Unbind us from the anxiety and fear that has trained the body to live as if we are braced for some impact that is about to come. Unbind us from the words that tear down instead of lift up. Unbind us from self-doubt and self-harm that shrinks the soul. Unbind us from systemic abuse and oppression that wrap communities in cloth they did not choose. Unbind us from poverty and disease that press us down like a weight that will not lift. Unbind us from the lack of empathy that turns the neighbor into a threat and a stranger into a problem. Unbind us from divisiveness and hatred that feels righteous while they rot our own hearts. Unbind us from divisions that teach us we must belong to a side first, and then we can belong to a God that follows that side. Unbind us from the stories the world keeps telling that sounds like truth. The story that says worth must be earned, that control is peace, and that winning is indeed salvation. The stories which take our resurrected bodies, they throw us in the tomb, they wrap us up, and then they seal it shut. For if we are walking towards the cross with Jesus here in Lent, and we do not believe that we need to be unbound in some way to the way that the world has shaped us, we have it wrong. For Lent is the time to prepare. And may this be our prayer. Unbind us from whatever keeps us from you, O Christ, and let us go and follow you to the cross and to death and to new life. Amen.